The smell reached her before the sound did. Wood smoke and wet leather, and something underneath it, something sharp that didn't belong to the forest. Addie had lived long enough in the Cariboo to know that smell. Men who'd been riding hard, men who hadn't stopped to wash. In a week she set down the jar she'd been sealing and listened. The creek was still running loud from last night's rain. The spruce trees were doing what spruce trees always did. Not much, and then, under all of it, the slow, deliberate crunch of hooves on frozen mud. More than one horse, coming up the switchback from the south road, the one that didn't lead anywhere. Except here. Addie didn't panic. Panic was a luxury she'd stopped allowing herself. The winter, Clement, walked off the property with the good axe, and never came back. She'd been 26 then. She was 29 now, and the fear that lived in her chest had quieted into something harder and more useful. A cold attention that noticed everything. She moved to the window first. 2 horses. 3 men, because one of them was riding double with another. The smaller one slumped like he'd been drinking or been hurt. She couldn't tell which yet, and it didn't much matter. What mattered was the rifle boot on the lead horse, and the way the man carrying it sat, loose in the saddle. The kind of loose that meant he wasn't worried about anything. Men who weren't worried about anything were the ones you had to worry about. She went to the back of the cabin and lifted the boards under the woodbox. The Enfield was where it always was, wrapped in oilcloth, loaded. She checked the action out of habit, even though she knew it was clean. Then, she carried it back to the main room and stood to the left of the door where they couldn't see her through the window glass. The horses stopped at the edge of the yard. Nobody called out. That was wrong. Out here, you called out from a distance. You let the person inside know you were there. Before you got close, that was just how it was done. The fact that these 3 hadn't done it told her everything she needed to know about their intentions. "Hello, the cabin," the lead man finally said, and his voice had the flat quality of someone who wasn't asking. Addie said nothing. "We can see the smoke," he said. "We know somebody's in there." She didn't answer that either. The smaller one, she'd realized by now he wasn't drunk or hurt, just young, maybe 17, slid down from the horse and looked at the lead man like he was waiting for instructions. The lead man's name, she would learn later, was Fen. She didn't know that yet. Right now he was just the one with the rifle boot and the careless way of sitting, and that was enough. "We're just looking for somewhere to water the horses," Fen said, "and maybe get out of the cold for a bit." "Creek's 20 yards east," Addie said, "through the door. Help yourselves." A pause. Then he laughed. A short sound, like he appreciated the joke. "That's not very neighborly. I'm not your neighbor." Another pause, longer this time. She heard one of them say something low to the other, something she couldn't catch. Then the sound she'd been waiting for and dreading. Boots on the porch steps. Not 1 set. 2. "Ma'am, we're going to need to come inside." "No," she said. "You're not." The door handle moved. Addie had built the bar across it herself after Clement left, a length of pine pinned into iron brackets she'd ordered from a catalogue and driven in with a borrowed drill. It held. The handle rattled again, harder. And then there was a shoulder against the door. She could hear the frame groan. And then she did something she had thought about doing many times in the dark, lying awake listening to the sounds the forest made, and now she actually did it. She fired through the door, not at anything she could see, into the wood, angled down, at the level a man's leg would be if he was standing with his full weight against the door. The sound inside the cabin was enormous. She had forgotten how enormous it was. The Enfield's recoil hit her shoulder like a push from a large hand, and she was already working the bolt before the echo came back from the tree line. Somebody screamed, not a dying scream, a pain scream, which was better, actually, because dead men's partners got furious and grief-stupid, but hurt men's partners got cautious. She heard scrambling on the porch, boots on wood, and then the sound of something heavy dragging. And then she heard the young one's voice saying something fast and frightened that she couldn't make out. She moved to the window and looked. Fen hadn't moved. He was still on his horse, watching the cabin with an expression she couldn't read from here. The third man, stocky, red-bearded, the one she'd never gotten a good look at, was on the ground holding his shin, and the young one was crouched next to him doing nothing useful. The porch was empty. She'd hit the one with the shoulder then. He was still moving, dragging himself toward the horses, which was good. That was what she wanted, all of them moving away. "Last chance," she called out. "Lady." Fen's voice had changed. The flat quality was gone. Something else had replaced it, not rage, exactly, but the cold version of it kind, which was worse. "You just made a very significant mistake." She already knew that. She'd known it the second she pulled the trigger. The mistake wasn't firing. The mistake was that she'd wounded instead of stopped, and now she had 3 men in her yard with an injury to explain and a reason to be angry. And she had a single-shot rifle and 4 rounds left and 1 bar across 1 door. She started moving before she let herself finish that thought. The back window, the root cellar door, the gap in the skirting board she'd never gotten around to fixing that was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through if they went flat on their belly. She'd catalogued all of these things over the years, the same way she'd catalogued everything else, quietly, without telling anyone, because there had been no one to tell. She was halfway to the back window when she heard the horses. Not the 3 in the yard. Something else, from the north, from up the ridge, moving fast, not the careful pace of someone on the established trail, but the headlong recklessness of someone cutting straight down through the spruce. She heard branches snapping. She heard the horse breathing hard, and then she heard a voice, not hers, not Fen's. A voice she had never heard before in her life that said, "Step away from the building." Just that, 4 words, in a tone that had nothing to prove. She saw him through the window. He was big. That was the first thing. Genuinely big. Not in the manner of men who worked hard and ate well, but in some more fundamental way, as if he'd been built with different materials than the men in the yard. He sat his horse without any apparent effort, and the horse was big too, dark bay, still blowing hard from the descent, but standing solid under the rider's weight. The man wore no coat, despite the cold, just a canvas work shirt and suspenders and a rifle across his saddle that he hadn't raised yet and didn't need to. Fen looked at him. The man looked back. "This isn't your business," Fen said. "It is now." The red, bearded man on the ground had stopped making noise. Even the young one had gone still. There was something about the way the newcomer sat that made stillness seem like the correct response. He wasn't performing anything. He wasn't trying to look dangerous. He simply was, whatever he was, and it filled the yard the way cold fills a room when you open a door in January. 3 of you and 1 of me, Fen said, and it wasn't a threat, just a fact he was laying out, an equation. 2 of you, the man said. Denny can't ride. A long moment. Fen's jaw moved. He looked at the cabin, then back at the rider, calculating something. Addie watched from the window and held herself very still. She had the Enfield in her hands and she knew how to use it, but she also knew that whatever was happening in the yard right now was happening on a frequency she wasn't part of, between people who understood each other in some way she didn't. "We'll be back," Fen said. "Maybe," the man said. "Ride south. Don't come back up this road." Another moment. Then Fen turned his horse. The young one helped the red-bearded man. Denny, apparently up onto the horse behind him, which looked painful for everyone involved. They moved off down the switchback, unhurried enough to preserve some dignity. And the yard went quiet, except for the creak and the wind, and the big man's horse stamping once on the frozen ground. Addie stayed at the window. The man didn't move toward the cabin. He dismounted and stood by his horse with his hand on its neck, and waited, which she understood immediately was the right thing to do. He was giving her time. He understood that she needed time. "They'll be back." she said, through the glass, because it was true. Probably, he said. You should know that before you. She stopped, because she didn't know how to finish the sentence. Before you committed to this, before you made it your problem. She didn't know what he was committing to or why, and she didn't want to assume. I know, he said. She looked at him for a long moment, big hands, grey starting in the beard. The kind of stillness that wasn't emptiness but something more like patience. The patience of someone who had waited out worse things than a cold afternoon in a stranger's yard. She lifted the bar off the door. His name was Brecken. He'd been up on the North Ridge since the spring, he said. Trapping, some. Cutting timber. The way he said it made her think he was leaving things out. But she didn't press. People came up into the Cariboo backcountry for one of two reasons. Because they were running towards something, or because they were running away from it. And she'd learned not to ask which, because she'd be asked the same in return. He accepted the tea she offered, and sat at the table with his big hands wrapped around the mug, and looked at the hole she'd put through the door. Not critically. Just looking. Good angle, he said. I was aiming lower. Still good angle, he looked at her. You live up here alone. 3 years. He nodded like that answered something. She asked if he was hungry, and he said he wasn't, and she made him food anyway, because she could see that he was. The way you could see it in the careful way he held himself, the slight hollow around the jaw. He ate without comment, which she appreciated more than she would have appreciated thanks. Outside tide, the afternoon was going. The light, through the spruce, was already turning that specific shade of amber that meant maybe an hour before dark. Addie stood at the window and watched the south road and thought about Fenn's voice when he'd said, "We'll be back," and the coldness of it, and the fact that he'd said it at all. Most men, when they turned their horses, wanted you to believe they were done with you. Fenn had wanted her to know he wasn't. That was a particular kind of man. You don't have to stay, she said. I know, Brecken said. She turned to look at him. He was watching the south road too, from where he sat, just barely able to see it through the window at that angle. I'm not asking you to, she said. I know that too. She couldn't tell if he was being stubborn or something else. She'd forgotten, she realized, how hard it was to read someone new. After 3 years up here, with no one but herself, she'd lost the habit of it. Why? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, because I heard the shot and I came, and then I saw what I saw, and now I'm here. He looked at her. That's all. It wasn't an answer to the question she'd asked, but it was honest, and she found that she accepted it. They came back at first light. She'd known they would. She'd slept in her chair with the Enfield across her knees and woken twice from a half-sleep, listening, hearing nothing. Brecken had taken the porch, wrapping himself in the horse blanket she'd offered, and she'd looked out at him. Sometime around midnight, and he was sitting against the wall, with his own rifle across his lap and his eyes open, and she'd thought, he's not sleeping either, and that thought had done something unexpected to her. Not comfort, exactly, but something adjacent to it. There were 4 of them now. Fenn had found someone. A 4th man, broader than the others, sitting a horse like he'd been born on one. The red-bearded man wasn't with them, which confirmed she'd done real damage to his leg. The young one was there, looking pale, and like he wished he were somewhere else. They stopped at the edge of the yard again, same as before, and Fenn looked at the cabin and then at Brecken, standing on the porch. Last chance to walk away, Fenn said. To Brecken, not to her. No, Brecken said, just that one word, standing on the porch boards in the grey morning light, not reaching for his rifle, but not making a secret of where it was. There are 4 of us, Fenn said. I can see that, and you're, what, 1 man, and a woman who shoots through doors. Addie had come to the doorway when she heard the horses. She stood behind Brecken, close enough that she could feel the cold coming off him, and she looked at Fenn and said, the woman who shoots through doors would like you to notice she's not doing it right now. She's giving you the chance to leave first. A short silence. Then the young one laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him, and looked immediately like he regretted it. Fenn's expression didn't change. "What's in the cabin?" "Nothing that belongs to you," Addie said. "Let me be the judge of that." "No," Brecken said. "You won't be." The new man, the broader one, had his hand on his rifle. She could see it from here. She could also see that Brecken had noticed, and that Brecken's left hand had moved in a small, unhurried way to where his own rifle was. And none of this was happening loudly or dramatically. It was happening in the grey quiet of early morning, in the way that real things happened, without announcement. "Last time," Fenn said. "I know," Brecken said. Same answer. Something shifted in Fenn's face. The calculation ended. She'd seen that shift before. In Clement's face. In the faces of other men she'd known. The moment when a man decided that talking was finished and whatever came next would not be reversible. She raised the Enfield. What happened after that, she would spend a long time trying to put in order, because it didn't arrange itself cleanly in her memory the way stories were supposed to. The broader man went for his rifle. Brecken moved, not fast. Exactly, but without a wasted motion, a single economic movement that she would later think of as the opposite of urgency. And the shot he fired was precise, and it caught the broader man's horse rather than the man himself, which she understood later was intentional. The horse stumbled, and the broader man was thrown forward, and by the time he got his feet under him, Brecken was at the edge of the porch, with his rifle up, and the distance between them had changed. Fenn's horse spooked at the shot and sidestepped, and in that half-second Addie fired over his shoulder. Over his shoulder. Not at him, though she could have. Though she thought about it, and the shot went into the dirt 2 feet in front of his horse's hooves, and Fenn hauled back on the reins. The young one had already turned his horse. The broader man looked at Brecken, who was standing on the frozen ground now with his rifle, not quite pointed, but almost pointed, and appeared to complete some kind of arithmetic, and backed up. "Get Fenn," Brecken said, and the broader man looked at Addie, and looked at the rifle she was already reloading, and went to Fenn's horse, and took the bridle and pulled. They went down the south road and didn't look back. Addie stood in the yard with the Enfield, and watched them go, until she couldn't hear the horses any more. And then she stood in the yard alone for a moment, listening to the creak, and the silence that followed all loud things. And then her legs decided to stop working properly, and she sat down on the frozen mud. Brecken sat down next to her. They didn't say anything for a while. The morning light was coming up properly now, that thin, clean Cariboo light that looked like it had been rinsed in cold water, and a raven crossed overhead without making a sound. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," she checked. "No, you?" "No." She looked at her hands. They were shaking, which annoyed her, but she supposed they'd earned it. "They might come back," she said. "They might," he said, "but I don't think so. Fenn's the kind of man who picks things he thinks will be easy." He looked at her sideways. "You weren't easy," she laughed. "It came out wrong, too short, but it was genuine." "No," she said. "I wasn't." She looked at him for a moment. He was looking at the south road still, that patient way he had of watching things, like he was in no hurry for anything to resolve itself. "You could have ridden away last night," she said. "When they came back this morning, it would have been my problem, not yours. I know. So why didn't you?" He took a moment before answering. Not like he was constructing something, but like he was finding the actual truth of it, which she appreciated. "Because that's not what you do," he said, "when you hear a shot, and you come, and you stay, and you see what you see." He paused. "That's not how this works. You don't come and stay, and then leave when it gets worse." She thought about that. "I don't need looking after," she said, and she meant it, but she also needed him to know that she meant it, that it wasn't the kind of thing a person says when they mean the opposite. "I know," he said. "You shot through a door at a man twice your size, and then you reloaded and came outside, and you were scared the whole time, and you did it anyway." He looked at her. "I saw you. I know you don't need looking after. She looked away. The creek was running loud today. The spruce were doing what spruce trees always did. Then what? She said. He took another long moment. Company, he said. Maybe just that, if you wanted. She thought about the 3 winters she'd done alone, the specific weight of them. The way silence accumulated until it became something physical, something you had to move through. The way she'd gotten so good at not needing anything that she'd almost convinced herself it was the same as not wanting anything. There's a line shack, about 6 kilometers up the North Ridge, she said. Been empty since the Greer family sold the back section. I've been meaning to fix the roof, but I haven't gotten to it. He looked at her. It'd need work, she said. Windows are probably gone, stoves likely seized. I've fixed worse, he said. The North Ridge gets cold. I know the North Ridge. She picked at the frozen mud on her boot for a moment. The shaking in her hands had stopped. I'm not looking for, she started, and he said I know before she could finish, which was either presumptuous or considerate, and she found she couldn't decide which. He said, North Ridge is good timber country. It is, she agreed. Good trapping too, upper elevation. Yes, and I expect you know this country better than I do, he said. Creeks, trail conditions, where the mud gets bad in the thaw. I do know all of that. So, he stood up, brushed the frozen mud off the back of his trousers. Seems useful, both of us knowing things. She looked up at him. He wasn't performing anything. He wasn't trying to be what she needed. He was just stating a fact in the simple, unhurried way he did everything, and she found that, after 3 years of doing everything alone, after Clement, after the particular loneliness of being good at surviving without being asked to, she found that she could accept a fact. Roof's bad on the south end, she said. You'll need shingles. I've got cedar up at the camp, and the stove. I'll look at it. She stood up, brushed off her own trousers, looked at him for a moment in the morning light, this large, quiet man who had come down off the ridge when he heard the shot and hadn't left. Addie, she said. Brecken, he said. She nodded, he nodded. They stood in the cold yard for a moment, both of them looking at the south road, which was empty now, and would probably stay empty. Coffee, she said, before you head back up. Thank you, he said, and that was all. She walked back to the cabin. She heard him follow, his boots on the porch steps, and she didn't look back, but she noted the sound of it, the particular weight of another person on those boards, which she'd almost forgotten, and she put the coffee on, and outside the creek ran, and the spruce trees did what spruce trees did, and the morning came fully in over the Cariboo hills, with its thin, cold, completely ordinary light.